Coming up on WordBirds.
I'm going to come back to, is it really useful to someone? Because if it is useful to someone, they're going to send it to their buddies, right? Take this banker report I talked about, right? The reason that it got more and more traction is not because we advertised it to the bankers. We actually never advertised to anyone, for that matter. It's just the bankers read about it and told their banker friends about it. And as a result, their banker friends told their banker friends, right? And I think the friend recommendation, no matter how much we're getting in terms of inundated media these days, it still works, right?
Hello and welcome to WordBirds, a birds of a feather conversation amongst people that care about words. Today on the show, we're back with Friends of the Bird. Today's guest is Rainer Gawlick. He is a former tech executive and current chairman of the board of Proto Labs. Today we're going to talk about how gimmicks don't work, but great content does. We're going to talk about how content that's useful cuts through the noise and gets shared in the world. And we're going to talk about the future of BDRs and marketing in general. Let's sit back and get some insight from the flock.
What could you do with a 90% reduction in content errors, a 70% increase in content quality, and a 60% reduction in content editing costs? Probably what our customers are already doing. And that's creating better content faster. Acrolinks, the amazing content company.
Hello, Rainer, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm very excited to have you here today. This season is really about bringing people that I know from the industry in and talk about content matters. I definitely know you. We work together at Perfecto. I have employees that have worked with you multiple times, and you've a lot of experience here. So let's jump right in with the quick fire questions. What's your best and most successful content campaign?
So I thought about this in advance, and I had actually three that I was trying to debate between, and they actually have a common theme we can get to later on. But, having to pick one, I'm going to pick one that I did for a company called Sophos. The company's in the security space. And we had a blog, this is sometime around 2008, so a long time ago, that had between 1.5 and 2 million visitors a month, which back then is a lot. And what we did is we kind of carved out a space of information that people really were interested in, particularly Facebook security. So whenever something weird happened with Facebook, some security incident, that was a big issue back then, anyone who wanted information about it went to our blog to find out what was going on. Reporters went there, CISOs went there, consumers went there, and we had all the best information on that particular issue. And that drove a ton of traffic to one of our branded sites. And from that, we then drove traffic to our company that provided security products, particularly endpoint and network and web security. So that was one of the ones that was truly successful. And I think the key thing there was just great content, right? It was really useful, and people love useful content. So that'll be the one I'd pick as the best one.
Fantastic. The flip side of that, what is the one that stands out to you as the worst?
This is a little embarrassing. So this is around same company, actually, interestingly, a little bit later. And at the time, these viral videos were getting to be something that people were interested in, particularly viral commercials. And Philips did a viral commercial on some called male hair products for the people for kind of below the waist area. And they had a commercial that actually went viral, and they did it in this kind of very British humor kind of way that kind of worked. And so we had a British guy running our marketing, kind of the creative part of our marketing team, and he saw this and liked this and said, maybe we should do something of the same genre. So, we're a security company, and so they came up with this concept of a guy dressed in a rubber suit talking about security and all the various innuendos that can go with that, and create a little set of short videos that, try to play it up the security that provided using all the obvious innuendos you could use. Complete bomb out. Everyone hated it. It was pretty cringy in the end. My judgment at the time was this is not good. We should not do this. But my team convinced me that I was being a Luddite and had no creativity, and I should kind of go with it. So I did, but clearly a mistake. Didn't get a lot of traction, but it got a lot of people rolling their eyes in the wrong kind of way.
So out of those two, which one did you take more learning from?
I think they kind of come together in one lesson. And I think the lesson is gimmicks don't work, but great content does. So if you provide people with stuff that they could use, they're going to pass on to their friends. They're going to come back. They're going to leverage it. If you do something gimmicky, it's kind of like hit or miss. Who can predict if a TikTok video is going to go viral or not? Like no one, right? It seems pretty random. And so if you go for gimmick, hey, you could get lucky, like the Phelps people did, right? Or you could have a bomb out like we did. So to me, the content is put substance, give people something of value. If you do that, you have a pretty good chance of success.
It's interesting because the time that we spent together at Perfecto, I have a very similar two-part arc of the magazine that we built, Factors Magazine, that had all the information on the devices that were being used by our customers. Super valuable, actionable content. It wasn't a gimmick. It was information that not only helped customers to understand the importance of testing across a wide range of devices, but also helped our sales team increase average deal size. The flip side of that was the Volkswagen campaign in San Francisco, where we rented 13 Volkswagen Bugs and a sign truck, and the branding on that was "Don't let bugs get you down." And same thing. I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. I remember telling Randall Levray, who was the brains behind the campaign, it all worked out. Randall, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that it's bad, but I don't want to be in your meetings. Like, I can't come and hear about this because every time I hear about it, it makes me uncomfortable. But you do you. You guys know your cost per lead. You know what you're up to. Go and do it. And the learning is, like, if you're doing the right thing and sending the right message, you're going to be successful. And that's where things come from. We ended up turning that around and turning all that content from that campaign into ABM that was interesting and entertaining. But the results and the click-through rate on that sign truck and the Volkswagens and the drone that flew around the Embarcadero in San Francisco, I don't know.
So great.
Not so great.
The one thing I would say, though, is it's okay to make mistakes and sometimes to let your teams make mistakes. I think, if you're the kind of leader who always thinks that they know better, and, as a result, don't let your teams do things that you don't like, I don't think that's a good leader either, right? So, everyone's going to make some mistakes. They're going to make some mistakes on their way up. I'm sure I made plenty. And I'm glad that people who I worked for at the time allowed me the rope to make them, because hopefully it made me a better leader later. So I think we both made the right call to let our teams do it despite our judgments.
We shipped out a lot of boxes full of little gummy bugs with that campaign too. It's confounding sometimes, but here we all are. We made it through. I mean, when you look at the things, I mean, you're talking about the things that you did at Sophos as a big identifiable company. That blog with 1.5 million followers, readers in 2008. That's early days for that kind of volume. How would you repeat that today at the scale that would, I mean, that 1.5 in views at a company like Sophos would need to be 10-ish million today. How do you start that over again?
Yeah, so I think it'd be pretty hard because you have to come up with something that's pretty useful, people are interested in, and no one else has already provided it, right? And so sometimes the way to do that is to, I think, focus on what you have that's unique. You give the example from Perfecto, right? Which is we had device information that no one else had. And that was pretty unique, and no one else was going to get that. I'll give an example from a company I went to subsequently called Interlinks. And the volumes weren't quite the same, but the coverage in terms of our target audience was even better. So what Interlinks did is it sold a virtual data room, which is kind of the place where companies provide confidential data during an M&A process. And we sold that to bankers. So bankers use that when there was an M&A process in companies. And one of the interesting things about doing virtual data rooms is that we know who's buying whom about when the process starts, which is about 6 months before it gets announced. So we have a kind of a 6 months early lead time on what the M&A market is going to look like, which if you're an M&A banker, super interesting. Now, we couldn't, of course, reveal any particular company. That would be not appropriate. But we can go trends. We can say, hey, in the tech sector, deal volume is up and average deal value is going down, or the number of companies that are putting themselves up in the sales process going up. Or we can do it by region, by vertical. We could cut all this stuff. And then we would every 6 months put out a report that predicted these trends. And if you're a banker, an M&A banker, it was must reading, must see TV, except this was a report. And they all looked at it. And so I'd say, I'd never met a banker who didn't ask me when the next report is coming out. And whenever it came out, even CNBC put us on the air to have us discuss it. So while the volumes weren't that great, the coverage and the percentage of people who are target audience, it was fantastic. And it's kind of the same thing, really useful content. And to your question, it was content only we had. And as a result, it could be unique, right? And so I think, I don't know how many companies have that, but I think the thing I'd look for is, do you have something that's useful and do you uniquely have it? And if you do, you can at least in your target audience do something pretty powerful.
It's an interesting approach. We did the same sort of thing back in the early days of Pixis Mobile, where actually before we were mobile, we were working with state treasurers' offices on optimizing their online enrollment in 529 educational investment plans. And here's the thing: the states don't manage the plan, the investment managers do. So state of Maine had Merrill Lynch, for instance. So we're going to the treasurer with our data of how we view the process and where we see winners and losers in the market, knowing that they're going to go to their administrator with this data and drive their administrator back to us. And so we actually created the data. I mean, it wasn't a data point anybody was looking at. It was the process of online enrollment in an institutional investment plan that came out of nowhere. Like you said, got media coverage because we were the only people talking about this, that drove customers back around. We couldn't sell to a state. We could sell to an investment manager. It resonated really nicely. But I think today's different. And there's so much content, and generative AI doesn't help with that. It just creates more. And people have gotten so good at ignoring things. How do you cut through the noise now to be recognized in a world where we're going out of our way to not recognize?
Yeah, I think, as we all know, right, there's two things when you try to have a campaign. One is the content, and the second is the placement, right? So that people see it. And that makes it harder. I'm going to go back to, and this is going to sound boring and perhaps a bit simplistic, I'm going to come back to, is it really useful to someone? Because if it is useful to someone, they're going to send it to their buddies, right? Take this banker report I talked about, right? The reason that it got more and more traction is not because we advertised it to the bankers. We actually never advertised to anyone, for that matter. It's just the bankers read about it and told their banker friends about it. And as a result, their banker friends told their banker friends, right? And I think the friend recommendation, no matter how much we're getting in terms of inundated media these days, is still works, right? Mm-hmm. I'll give another example that was interesting. Also, a long time ago, is a company called SolidWorks, which is in the CAD/CAM space. And back then, it was very difficult to exchange different CAD files. So CAD is basically a digital model of some kind of part that you want to produce. And these digital files back then were like 50, 60 megabytes, which you can't put into email. And so we created a tool that would allow you to exchange the CAD file with some small reduction in fidelity, but taking it down to like 100 megabyte, 100K, right? So less than a megabyte. And all of a sudden you could send it by email. And that tool was incredibly useful. And basically anyone who was a recipient of one of those files now also said, hey, this is a great tool, let me use it, and so on and so forth. And that particular tool was called eDrawings, brought in about 1.5 million leads per month. Wow. I think leads is perhaps a generous statement because a lot of these people weren't necessarily going to buy our software,
Hmm.
but they allowed us to build our database because in order to download eDrawings, you had to at least give us your email address. And so as a result of having the email address, we could then subsequently show you other marketing materials such that if you were ready to engage in a sales process, at least you'd heard of us.
Right.
So maybe it's fair to say it was 1.5 million contacts per month rather than leads, but still, that's pretty cool.
Got to start somewhere.
Um,
I mean, it's a very Mike Volpe approach of I know a lot of people are never going to buy my product, but I want everybody to know so that I can find the people in that pool that are going to buy my product.
yeah. And to speak of Mike, right? He had SiteGrader, right? Way back in the day when HubSpot started. I don't know if anyone remembers that. I don't know if it was still around actually, right? But it was a tool you could download that looked at your website and graded it. And very useful. And one of the things that I think HubSpot recognized, which is also really good, actually maybe a good point to make here, is that what SiteGrader did is it showed you hopefully how good your site was, right? And if it wasn't good, it showed you some ideas to improve it, so you can subsequently show how good it was. So you're thinking about if I'm the head of the marketing or the person in charge of the web, what I want to do is impress my boss and tell my boss how great what I'm doing is, right? So that my boss is impressed with what I'm doing. And so the site grader telling me that I'm in the top 10% of websites and me being able to show that to my boss, very attractive.
Mm.
So I think that's another interesting thing is like, can you do something that helps someone's career, right? And if you help their career, for example, by giving them the tools to show their boss how great they are, I think that would get attention and would also get passed around. So I think it's back to, do you do something useful and can you as a result get the viral effect, right? I think in the end, the things that matter is not the stuff that you can advertise and spend millions of dollars on clicks. I think it's the thing that is good enough that it's viral.
I mean,
And I
I
don't think
think it
that's
has to
changed.
be. We did last maybe 2 years ago. We built a handbook on how to, from an enterprise standpoint, build a policy on inclusive language usage. And yes, our product does have the ability to govern the use of inclusive language, but that wasn't the purpose of the book. The book was a handbook that somebody could use. And we know that both customers and folks that are never going to be customers use the book. And that was the intent, is if we can be actionable and relevant and helpful, some percentage of, let's call it a qualified lead, is going to shake out of that process.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is that we're going to be more recognizable. We're driving adoption. We're doing it in the form of being assistive. And that's always been a big focus of what we've tried to do with content over the course of my last several experiences is forget about talking about us. It's not super interesting. Nobody's going to work in the morning doing searches on Google to find out about my company. That's very rare. They're trying to solve an individual problem that they have sitting at their desk. Like, can you help me right now? And if we can be that assistance to them in any percentage of their search, it's going to be good for us in the long run. And so I totally buy into, content that's useful gets shared, content that's useful gets used, and the idea of the best content being that actionable content. I think you're dead on there.
And the example you provided is great, right? Because you can imagine if you have a guide like that you can use for inclusive language. If I'm a marketeer, I'm going to have a lot of friends who are marketeers, right? And, most of those aren't going to be in companies that are competitive to me. And so I'm going to
Right.
pass on to my friends, right? And here you are cutting through the noise and you haven't had to do anything in terms of, putting out ads or doing, buying clicks in order to get the traffic, right? The traffic just generates itself.
Yeah.
And so I think if you can make great content that your target audience is going to think is so useful that they're going to pass on to their friends, I think that's the measure of what you need. And I think even today will still drive success.
Fantastic. Last section today, PSOTD, provocative
Okay.
statement of the day. What do you
Yeah,
got?
so I've thought about this, and it's got a little bit of a history lesson to show how old I am. So when I started out in marketing, this is in 1999. I was head of marketing at a company called Aspen Tech, and we would send out emails, email marketing, everyone knows and loves. And we would get response rates in the 40% range. It was absolutely stunning. And of course, at the time, people were so excited to get an email that they looked at it and responded. And when we all know those times have changed. And so then, about 7 or 8 years, maybe 10 years ago, the whole concept of kind of BDRs really came out, where you'd have people who would, aggressively and hopefully helpfully reach out to prospects and talk to prospects and convince them that they ought to take a look at whatever product the BDR is trying to sell. And that was a very successful method for many years. I'm involved with a bunch of companies, on the board of a bunch of tech companies, and I'm seeing the success of that wane. And I wonder if the whole idea of using BDRs to kind of go after and find leads for sales is something that, at least in this current incarnation, it's run its course. And the reason I say this is because, unlike email, where you can just crank up the emails and it costs you zero. So even if the response rates go down to, percent or less, in the end, you can still make the economics work. But when you think about a BDR, there's a point at which, if the response rates don't stay above a certain threshold, there's no way to make it work, right? Because you actually have people who you have to pay. And the people don't scale infinitely, right? And there's only so many calls in the day that they can make. And I wonder if the industry has run its course, and we need to find something new and different to engage people and get their attention, take a look at something. Because when someone called me, I used to feel this kind of almost moral obligation to return the call eventually, after the 3 or 4 messages they would have left for me. And at least for me, that moral need has declined substantially over the last few years, and I may not be alone in that.
No, you're not.
And so I think that we have a whole tool that we all think is a pillar of our marketing that I think is going to crumble over the next few years.
So what comes next?
I wish I knew. I'd start a company and go and go after it. I honestly don't know. I wonder to some degree if it's back to, trying to just stay in front of people. I think fundamentally marketing has a very hard time generating the demand. I think it's a very hard thing to do, particularly in B2B, which is what I'm familiar with. In B2C, I can't comment as much, because either the company has the problem it wants to buy, or they don't. And if they're not ready to buy, if it's not a problem they think is important, I think it's very hard, by and large, to influence things. And so I think the key to marketing is not so much to create demand, it is in B2B. I think it's more to be there and be known, such that when the company is ready to pursue, that demand arises for them, ready to pursue it, that they know about you and reach out to you. So I'm a firm believer in more things like newsletters and those kind of regular communications that have enough valuable content that the person is going to take a look at it. And there's a couple of things I read. So, for example, I used to be at McKinsey a long time ago, and they send out a bunch of stuff regularly. I take a look at it. I don't read all of it, but there's enough good stuff in there that I read some of it. And so it stays top of mind for me. And so I think that's where the future of marketing is can you do something useful on a regular basis, such that when then it's time for me to buy something, I think, I remember that company. They can solve this problem.
You're showing your German roots, because this is a problem that we deal with in Europe and specifically in Germany because of GDPR and the anti-competition laws in Germany, where we can't just communicate outbound. So the idea of a BDR is fantastic, but it's actually not legal in most cases, the way that we do it here. So you do have to be where the search is happening. We need to do more field marketing, for instance, in Europe. We need to be out at events. Here, from working with me, I hate paying for events. I think that the return on investment, at least in this market, is terrible. But it might be the only way that we can address the public in a place like Germany. So being out in front and building those relationships at that level becomes super important. And you drive that by being interesting and actionable when you meet people. It can't just be standing there in a booth with a demo running.
Yeah, I actually interestingly think, things, it may sound a bit old-fashioned, but I've seen some events that my companies have done have become more productive in the past
Hmm.
few years. And I think that could be driven by the fact that you don't go to an event for shits and giggles these days. You go to an event because you have something to do.
Yep.
Or something that you need to accomplish for your company, right? People are less interested in travel for travel's sake. The idea of going to an industry event is not that glamorous as it maybe
It
was
isn't.
15 years ago. And so I think people sometimes go there these days to actually learn something.
Yeah.
And so we found that the leads from some of these events is much more productive. So a company called Kyle and Hago, on the board there. We provide, actually interim CEO there at the moment. We provide graphics software for broadcasters, and both in sports and news. And there's a big event called NAB every year. And for us, that's become much more productive over the last few years in terms of the actionability, if that's a term, of the leads that come from it. And I think it's because people go there when they have a purpose,
Yep.
rather than just because they want another business trip.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think back to the 2006, 2008 time range when I would leave at the beginning of March and not come home until mid-June, and it was just a boondoggle. I mean, I was going to BlackBerry's big conference. I was going to Apple's big conference. We were going to SIA. We were going to SAP's user conference, and just in a row, going from Arizona to Florida to California. And it was fantastic. I can't point to what we got out of it, but I had a
Yeah.
great time in my late 20s. Nowadays, when we go, like Allie Davis is my head of field marketing here, and she's going in with a plan and objectives and a set of metrics that she needs to meet. Everybody that goes to the conference knows exactly what they're responsible for, and there are expectations associated with it. We're going to get a return on investment in everything we do. It's different now than it was, and that's to say I do miss the way that it was. It was fantastic back then, but I'm an older
Well,
person and I don't think I could keep up.
yeah, same here. Yeah, I'm not looking for the next business trip, but if I did go, it'd be for a purpose.
Yeah,
So anyway, so
exactly. Excellent. Reiner, thank you very much for being on the show. This was fantastic. I know everybody's going to get a lot out of this. If somebody is looking to contact you in the future, LinkedIn, best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is fantastic. My email is on it. You can always message me, but firstname.lastname@gmail.com is also always going to work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to WordBirds. WordBirds is hosted by Chris Willis, produced by Charlotte Baxter Reed, and brought to you by Acrolinks. For more information on Acrolinks, visit www.acrolinks.com.